This is an introduction demo to project operations. All views expressed on this recording are my personal views and not that of Microsoft or my employer. My name is Michael Nooms. I'm a functional consultant at SA Global. We're based at Cardiff and in Leeds. I'm actually based in Cambridgeshire in the little village of Brampton. I've been working with Microsoft products for many years, starting with the ERP system, Dynamics Great Plains. The introduction of Project Service Automation, or PSA, has allowed me to move over to the world of CRM and the Dynamics 365 customer engagement family. This is where I've built on my knowledge of PSA, project operations, sales, customer service, and of course, field service. Let's start with an overview of Dynamics 365 and project operations. Dynamics 365 is a series of business applications built in a cloud on the Microsoft Power Platform. Applications are grouped by functionality and role, whether it is sales, human resources, project, or finance, all together with data stored in a Dataverse or Azure SQL. The applications are accessible using the web browser or by using mobile devices. Data can also be accessible and extended by using other Microsoft tools such as Power BI, Power Automate Flow, and Power Apps. Key applications for this overview will be the Dynamics 365 Project Operations and its integration with Dynamics 365 Finance. Dynamics 365 Project Operation connects sales, resources, and project management and finance teams together to accelerate project delivery using the Dataverse and Finance Operations applications. Dynamics 365 Finance is part of Finance and Operations and is the core ERP finance system hosted on Azure to handle the financial postings for project operations when set up for integrated mode. I'll talk about this integrated mode later. Project Operations offers 5 core functional areas that extend and add to the Dataverse, such as sales, where it extends the opportunity, quotes, sales orders, and price list tables already part of the core system. The sales orders, known as contracts, represent the agreement with the customer and is required to raise invoices. There is a project management functional area suite, which allows you to plan, schedule, track, and build those estimates for project delivery. Resource management includes a shared centralized schedule board used for viewing resources availability and schedules. It allows you to also set up employees, contractors, subcontractors as resources and track their currently assigned roles and skill sets in order to find the right resource for your project delivery. There's also effort tracking capabilities where we can post transactions such as timesheets, expenses, and material usage. All of these entries can be processed by using a web client or by using a mobile app. So an end user could be on site and enter timesheets or material usage. We have a customer billing section which extends on the previous entries and allows us to generate revenue for scheduled milestones, timesheets, and expenses that may have been posted. The project operation has not been around that long, so where has it all started? I mean, it really started in 2016, where this initial product came along called Project Service Automation, which we'll call PSA for short. It was the first Dynamics 365 customer engagement module at the time to be available only for the web. At the time, Dynamics 365 customer engagement sales modules could be on-premise and were starting to move to the cloud. It was literally the sort of stepping stones to the introduction of the Dataverse. This PSA version 1 included core project functionality and had its own custom schedule board, which allowed also imports from Microsoft Project. It allowed timesheets as well and expenses, but they were very restrictive to amend. But then came version 2 in the spring of 2018. And again, it started to introduce new features to the Dynamics 365 customer engagement world. It started to include the United Client Interface for timesheets and expenses. So now this could be adapted no more restrictive dialog boxes. But this was the beginning of the introduction to the United Client interface. A new schedule board came along and they started to use a shared schedule board, which is used by also field service and customer services. Again, the introduction of the Unified Client Interface allowed PSA to sort of show the other modules, lead the way with new features and technology. In version 3, PSA is now solely only available in the Unified Client Interface. Again, this was the first of the Dynamics 365 Dataverse applications, which meant this product was leading the way again with a new look and feel interface. Unified Client Interface was then later required for all applications in the Dataverse to move over from the old legacy look and feel of the on-premise Dynamics 365 customer engagement world. In this version, it began to become much more of a mature product, with multi-currency options being made available, more functionality such as new project task window schedules. It also added new features in the project management areas, and we could also do things like reverse time and expense without having to process a manual journal. Then, of course, Microsoft then started to say that this product was going to be retired, and there was rumours, no official announcement, but there was rumours in the market about this, and to be a replacement product. So by the end of summer 2019, it was to be put to bed, but there was no guarantees on this. This meant I had to personally look at finding another product to focus on. So I started looking at field service, which is very similar to PSA. Instead of projects, we have work orders. But then, finally, in the autumn of 2019, then came along this new product that was to replace PSA, Project Operations. I started looking into it when it was first announced, and of course then discovered quite quickly it was just an updated version of PSA, but with new features. PSA had simply been updated with a new name, new features, and a heart transplant in the form of project tasks being now worked on in Project for the Web. It had a nice look and feel. It was very still much the dear loved PSA that I had been working with. Features introduced retainers, project task billing, which have been crucial to allow a project to be divided up between fixed price and time and materials. There's also more API options available for resourcing. So, for example, from a HR system, I could push records into my project operation tables, create resources, time off days on my calendars, etc. The biggest change was that project operations Dataverse can now integrate with the finance and operations ERP system, F&O for short, using a technology called dual write. This led to further discussions and rumours about the future of project management accounting module within F&O. And F&O consultants who once pitied the small PSA child as an annoying distraction, which could never compete with the mighty, bigger giant of the PMA module, now suddenly had to pay attention. And suddenly their worst fears were about to come true. Yes, they may even have to learn CRM, the Dataverse. More on this later. So in this section, we're going to look at some product scenarios, the very different ways of actually implementing project operations. There is actually 3 different ways to implement project operations. You can use the light deployment version, which is the top option there, which is in fact just the Dataverse, a Dataverse module such as sales or customer service. So if you already have these modules, then you can install this module in addition. So this then starts to extend the existing sales, Dynamics 365 sales and customer service products. The opposite contrast to this is at the bottom option, which is our F&O deployment. This is solely only F&O, and it's basically the existing way that the project management accounting, PMA for short, module is done today. There are no interactions with the Dataverse, and it solely sits within the finance and operations world. It allows companies to then handle the stock-based production scenarios where you build a product to be supplied for a project, manufacturing examples, and it's the only option that will allow you to use stock-based items. All of the other two options above can only use service-based items. The last option, which is in the middle, is a desired approach by Microsoft and is the integrated deployment version called Resource Non-Stock Based Scenario. It brings the Dataverse and the F&O module together using dual write. The data copies between the systems where required to ensure that it can be referenced and up to date. For example, I could create a customer in the Dataverse and this will copy over to the F&O accounts receivable module. Or I can create the customer there and it will then push over into the Dataverse records. The segregation of duties can be clear on this screen. Expenses is shown as being in the F&O world because it has an enhanced functionality and able to deal with exchange rates, etc. But otherwise, invoicing will begin in the Dataverse and complete in the invoicing section of finance and operations. From a role perspective, how would the different personas use the system? We'll start with the account management side of things and sales. We can use the product in the Dataverse to track opportunities, build a proposal. We can use a project to create estimates to help produce a quote based on a set of costings, price lists, or an actual customer price list or a central price list. We can track the negotiations in forms of activities, and once we win the deal, that then becomes a contract. The project manager can create a project and also help with the estimating, but they can also directly create a new project, build a project plan, and estimate the project cost and revenue. This builds up the budget, so whether it's timesheets, so time, hours, expenses, or material. It has one budget that it works with. From our project plan, we can then generate resource requirements, and the resource requirements can then be submitted to the resourcing team for allocated resources to the project. Of course, the project manager can also do that as well. Once we go down here to the resourcing team, they can review the resource requests that have been submitted that are connected to the requirements. They'll staff the project team by using the schedule board and then allocate to the project, the team to the project. Resources can then log time using the web client or mobile app, the project operations team app. They can log expenses, whether integrated or not. And all of these records all submit into for approval by the project manager. They can then review transactions that they wish to process and post on a periodic basis, each day, each week, each month, and they mark those transactions to be invoiced. They raise a pro forma invoice using the sales module within D365 Project Operations Dataverse. That invoice, pro forma invoice, will then integrate into finance and operations. The project accountant or the finance team, accounts receivables, can then manage accounts payables and accounts receivables records, chase payments, look after credit limits, etc. But what this integrated mode also offers is the ability to perform estimates, run revenue recognition for projects. Revenue recognition for projects is based in the finance ERP system of PMA, but SA Global also have a evergreen offering which allows you to run revenue recognition based on the project tasks in the Dataverse, and that will be performed by the project manager. So with the integrated mode, we start to see a product and tables all working together. And this highlights an importance to at least know a bit of the other side. What I mean by this is that if I'm a Dataverse consultant or work with Dynamics 365 customer engagement apps such as sales and field service customer service, then I need to know a little bit about what is happening on the F&O side. Do not necessarily need to know about dimension setups or nominal account structures or even any of that dark core accounting, but I need a basic understanding. The same applies to the F&O consultants who need to know more about the Dataverse and how the modules interact. They'll have some deep-rooted ways of working with the PMA modules, which have to be unpeeled and adapted to work in the new world. But both consultant types will also need to get involved with dual write, the bridge bringing the two worlds together. But this is more of a technical consultant's role, and is actually quite complex. But the dual write is basically saying, okay, well, when I create a customer, there'll be a mapping table to say, okay, if I specify a group, what field would that apply in the other side? So if I specify credit terms, what field in the Dataverse will it populate once it's populating F&O? Dual write is actually a finance and operations tool. So this is the emphasis goes more on the finance and operation team. But if you look at the background boxes there, these are the different areas that we have and modules in the actual products itself. So if we look, we have the sales module, we have project operations with its own tables, and we have the universal resource scheduling, which is shared by field service and customer service. Project operations has its own tables, but it extends and uses the other areas of the Dataverse. When we look at finance and operations, that has its own ledgers, its areas and modules: sales, purchasing, expense management, general ledger, bank management, and of course PMA. But the PMA side of things is now more of a holding area for transactions, as a lot of functionality has moved to be operational within the Dataverse side. So with finance and operations, the project management and account module has effectively been rebranded and is now known as project operations. PMA is still there, especially if you use the F&O option only, the stock-based scenario. That's still the PMA module as we know and love. But effectively it's been rebranded for the SKU, for the licensing, to be called project operations. PMAs are only going to be available when the F&O company or legal entity is not integrated with the project operations Dataverse environment. So I can still use PMA. Integrated mode will then see the majority of the functionality in F&O PMA module move to the Dataverse. Still there, the menu options are gone, but they're just hidden away because the functionality has simply moved to a different starting place in the Dataverse. One key point to note that although the functionality has simply been moved but not removed, one option that is still not that will be noticeable is the multiple budgets are not available today. So we can only have one budget, which a project task and the milestones will all be assigned against, and unfortunately multiple versions of that budget or forecast are not available. Transaction categories are set up in the Dataverse as the starting point and then synchronized into F&O. These are then assigned within F&O to the various setup, so time, expense, and so forth. Transactions, when they push across into F&O, are now going to be created as project integration journals. There is a stage import that can be scheduled to run, and these project integration journals will then create batches per day, per week, per month, however you wish to set those up. And those batches must be posted before they'll then hit the PMA tables and also the general ledger. Another important note is when we raise a project vendor invoice, i.e. a vendor invoice that has a link or costs need to be allocated to a project, or we are raising expenses that go to a project within the finance and operations F&O world, this will first post to a holding account. The reference to the project is a dimension code, but when we first look at the financials that it posts to, the transaction posts to, you'll notice it's like a balance sheet account, a holding area, where the record will, the values will stay, and the dual write will post those transactions into the Dataverse record to hit the project record. That then allows me as a project manager to see that there's some vendor costs or expenses now against my project. And I can then raise a pro forma invoice to pick up those to recharge if needed. Once they've hit the project in the Dataverse side, they'll then integrate back into F&O as a project integration journal. And the integration journal will reverse out the values in the holding account, the balance sheet account, and then post to the correct nominal account it needs to go to. Okay, let's walk through project operations. Bring up the actual application. So with project operations, we have a number of apps available for us. We have the main project operations app, the project operations team member app. This is for the team member license, and allows you to enter timesheets and expenses. We also have the project app as well, which is a byproduct of the project for the web integration. We're going to go into project operations. It'll present you with a desktop. This is the sales desktop. That's my assistant, some default notifications about opportunities closing. But out of the box, we receive a practice management dashboard. Gives me some nice KPIs based on actuals being posted, what's been invoiced. And I can also change this to the resource manager dashboard as well. I can then take a look at the records, drilling into the graph, clicking on a role, and then subjects me to take a look at those requirements. Go back to the home page. The other thing you can also do with Dynamics 365 is obviously we can also link in with our Power BI dashboards, and I can link in with a dashboard that I've got hosted. Then allowed me to drill in and see the information. Of course, open it up in Power BI as well. So let's go through the mechanics of a typical project operations setup. Before you do anything, you need a customer. Let's find our newly added customer. This record was created in Dynamics 365 Dataverse, then synchronized to finance and operations. We can go to accounts receivables, all customers, and somewhere here we then see the customer. Key fields are being populated from the Dataverse, now in finance and operations. We can also populate the information from here, which will then backfill into the Dataverse as well. Credit limits and so forth. Finance related type information, we can default those all in here. Let's just jump back to project and operations. Get to the account, we can assign a default price list. This price list could be on the account, but if it's not there, we can define one on the actual quote itself. With every new sale, we create an opportunity. We've created an opportunity for a new application system. There's a business process flow at the top, which allows us to populate and key fields into the system. There are some text fields to populate and add different descriptions. And a lot of this is down to the standard Dynamics 365 sales system. We now go to opportunity lines. You'll see we've got some basic pre-contract lines that may come into play should the system go ahead. We also have a quote that was entered and created as a result of that opportunity, and that has now been won and now converted into an opportunity. So I'm going to use the business process flow to go through the different stages. This business process flow shows me that we're trying to qualify it. When I now click onto propose, this will take me into the actual quote itself. So on the quote, we had a particular analysis tab. It has a summary tab. If we look at the quote lines, they're defaulted from the opportunity, and we could define a typical time material fixed price type billing method that might be applied to that project. Price list was copied from the customer into the actual quote record. This was a particular price list used at the time that was different to the default customer, so we copied it and adapted it. It provides profitability analysis. We can make a 33% margin. We can see typically when the revenue is likely to occur, when the costs are going to occur, and how much over the time period, and the type of role that's involved. We can also look at the comparison to the customer expectation. When we took a look, it was quoted for 25,000. Particular budget was under for 20,000, but for the other parts of their budget, we managed to quote in much lower. So overall, the quote was for 28,560, and the budget was for 30,000. Within the customer section, we could have split this over multiple customers involved in the purchase of the deal. What this means is that later, when it becomes a customer and you go to invoice the work, it will create an invoice per customer listed there. Just take a look at the quote line. So on the quote lines, we had a project. Just double click. We had on the quote line, we define time material, link it to a project. We will then specify the chargeable tasks that links to that particular quote. This then allows us to import the equivalent lines into the contract. The quote line details effectively create a snapshot of the task that was determined at the time of the deal. The fixed price as well, we have the same thing, but this time with fixed price. We have our chargeable tasks. Quote line details was imported with a one line. That was two lines merged together to summarize to the following. Change that. In the invoice schedule, I could have defined a milestone, but that was left. When the deal was won, we then converted that into a contract. And so the business process flow stages continue step by step. So on our contract, it takes a copy of the quote and our contract is ready to go. This time, of course, with the fixed price line, I needed to create a milestone. So when I go to the invoice schedule, created a milestone. We can create as many as we want, as long as it equated to the amount on the contract. We double click. You can see this is the amount. It's ready for invoicing, and that's what's going to be billed. We'll just save and close that. Go back to the top level of the contract. What we also had is the ability to create a retainer, and that has been created, and that's also been billed already. What we're going to do now is just click on create an invoice, and we're going to bill that milestone. So we'll click on create invoice. They'll go through, check what needs to be picked up, any timesheets, any milestones, and they'll be picked up. An invoice is then generated and created and available like this. So we have the value of 3,360. I'll just double click on that line. We should then see the milestone that's been picked up. If there's an external description on the milestone, that could have been populated into here by default. So if you need to add some more explanation to what was being billed, that can be done with that field. save and close. We then scroll down. We then have our values, 3,360. And there's no retainer for this one. Once we're happy with that, what we can then do is click on and look at the draft business process flow. We can review it. Maybe it was part of the process that goes to someone within the Dataverse, but we can go past this stage and confirm the invoice. Confirming the invoice allows you to push this into the finance and operations system, where we then see setup. So the invoice has been confirmed. We then need to run project management and accounting. We import from the staging table, which can be scheduled to run. And when we go to project invoice proposals, we should now see a new value in there, new invoice, invoice proposal, no invoice number, with a value of 3,600. That can then be printed. We're going to go click on post, we can print the invoice and then say OK. Okay, that will go through. And once that's running, we'll just jump back. The other thing to also do, once that's been done, we can just take a look at the project. We go to the project itself, to the project record, go to the latest one. We're going to take a look at the project that we've just been discussing. Again, we've got this business process flow that can be adapted and add your own key fields. We have a task that then links in with project for the web. We have our efforts and particular entries. Our team is made up to define the different resource and units, legal entities, and the type of role that's needed. We can look at the tracking tab to see what's out there and see what work's been performed so far. We can see we originally estimated for 8. We still have 2 hours remaining because I've updated that to increase it. And it was set to 0. And we've done 16 hours already on there. So overall, we originally planned for, say, 2,000 estimated revenue at completion will then be, say, 4,000 if it all gets rebuilt. We've got the estimates tab that allows us to take a look at the costs and looking at the sales. Let's update the pricing. Let's look at the price list to try and find a role for that particular team. Maybe it doesn't have that on the price list. Okay. Next step is that we can also add in expense estimates into this tab here. We can also add in material estimates, so if we need to purchase something, or maybe it's a contractor that needs to be involved as well. In addition to these functionality, we can also integrate with Microsoft Teams. I've created a team for my project. There's a conversation going on with the actual record, which I can then look at. When I click on this, I've got a tab on my project, which is linked to the project, and that allows me to interact with the project in the same way. I can have a discussion. This allows me to work with the record as if it's in Dynamics. But that's the end of the demo. Hope you enjoyed it, and maybe we'll post some more in the future. If you have any questions, please post on the video and I'll get back to you. Thank you.